For 3 years, an 8-year-old girl was held captive in her own house in the middle of town, a place everyone passed by, but no one really looked at. She was beaten, starved, and forced into silence. No one reported it, no one suspected, until a man stopped, looking directly at the truth the whole town had inadvertently turned away from. And his small act brought a great secret to light. Marina woke up before it was fully light, not because of an alarm, and certainly not because someone called her, but because of the familiar sound of footsteps from the old hallway, the dragging of slippers, heavy and labored, followed by a sharp knock on the door, as if trying to knock down the small room. "Get up! There's a pile of clothes that aren't finished." Isabella's curt voice echoed in like a dry, harsh wind. Marina groggily sat up from the thin mattress, pulling the frayed shirt over her body. Her eyes weren't wide open, not because she was still sleepy, but because they had learned to avoid all light, even the first rays of the day. The wooden table placed close to the window was her workspace, also where she ate and where she took naps. On the table, dozens of coarse cloth shirts were stacked, needles and threads scattered, a few rolled-up bandages, the only thing she had to treat the deep needle pricks in her hands. The needles were rusty, but she still had to use them. Marina carefully threaded the tiny eye, pursing her lips to keep her hands from shaking. Just one crooked stitch, and Isabella would be angry enough to use the wooden pestle to teach her a lesson. A noise behind her. She didn't turn around. Isabella placed a chipped porcelain plate on the table containing some cold rice mixed with congealed fat and a piece of dried fish, mangled and full of bones. She didn't say anything more, just pushed hard, causing the plate to hit the edge of the table, almost falling to the floor. "Eat quickly. Work quickly. And if you mess up again, don't blame me." Then she disappeared, as if Marina was air, existing, but not something anyone was obliged to notice. Marina picked up the spoon, scooping up a little rice. The taste was cold and as salty as tears. But she didn't cry. It had been a long time since tears had appeared. Perhaps her body had also learned to conserve everything, both blood and emotion. After breakfast, Marina continued to sew. Each stitch was an extreme act of caution. She knew the punishment for carelessness. Mid-morning, she stopped, stood up, and walked to the window. The room had no clock, but Marina always estimated the time by the sounds outside. The school bell, the voices of children calling to each other on the street. Today, too. Outside, the children wore backpacks and clean clothes, their mouths laughing brightly under the radiant sunlight. Marina rested her forehead against the window pane, one cheek marked with peeling paint. She didn't dream of anything big, just thought of a colored pencil, a book with a picture of a cat, or a name tag to wear on her chest. Isabella said she wasn't smart enough to go to school. School is for children who know how to obey. Marina didn't dare ask again. A crooked stitch. Marina frantically tried to pull it back, but it was too late. The seam tore for almost 2 centimeters. Footsteps sounded faster than usual. The door burst open, and Isabella's voice ripped through the room. "Messed up again? How many times have I told you?" She snatched the shirt, held it up to examine it, and then said nothing more. Her hand, holding the rattan cane, which she always kept near the kitchen, swung up. A whizzing sound, then a blow to Marina's back. She flinched, but the second blow hit her shoulder, the third her upper arm, causing the sewing needle to fall to the ground. She didn't scream or plead. She just bowed her head, her hands clenching the edge of her shirt. The only sounds in the room were her gasping breath and the cane striking the floor as Isabella left. She sat there for a while, her hands numb. The needle had fallen somewhere, but Marina didn't dare look for it. Her back burned, but there was no one to wipe it no clean water to wash it. She went to the bathroom, turned on the tap. The dripping water seemed to mock her. An old puddle spread across the tiled floor, full of mouldy smell. Marina took an old towel, wet it lightly, and used her trembling hands to clean the wound. Outside, Isabella was watching TV. The screen flickered, the changing light constantly reflecting on the wall. A lively game show echoed with the laughter of the audience. That laughter sent a chill down her spine, not because of the volume, but because it was so far away. For Marina, laughter no longer belonged to human beings. Night fell. After a cold dinner of a few hard pieces of bread, Marina sat silently at her desk. She no longer had the strength to sew, but didn't dare lie down to sleep. The dim yellow light reflected on the wall, casting the shadow of a thin child and a rickety chair. In the drawer, there were a few scraps of fabric that Isabella hadn't noticed. She secretly picked them up from previous sewing sessions, hiding them carefully in an old pocket. Tonight, Marina decided to do something she had been thinking about for months. Sew a small doll. Not to play with, but to have someone to be with. The fabric was carefully folded. She used grey thread to sew gentle curves, creating a simple shape. A round head, 2 tiny hands. She didn't know how to draw a face, so she left it blank, like herself. She sewed each stitch with her left hand because her right hand was bruised. The wind blew through the crack in the door, flipping over last month's electricity bill, which hadn't been paid. Marina saw the number, but didn't know if it was big or small. She had never learned how to read bills. She only knew that when that number appeared, Isabella would be angry again. Marina carefully cut a strand of blue thread, the only one left in the box, to make hair for the doll. The blue was like the sky she had never stood under for more than 10 minutes. She placed the doll next to her pillow. She looked at it for a long time, then whispered, "Tomorrow, I'll do your hair." Her voice was as soft as a breath. Outside the window, the wind blew gently, but the room didn't have a real window, just a piece of frosted glass fixed in place, impossible to open. No one heard Marina's words. No one knew that tonight was the first time she had spoken to anyone after many weeks of only silence. She closed her eyes. Beside her, the nameless doll lay on its side, looking up at the ceiling as if waiting for a dream. Marina didn't cry. Not because she was strong, but because she had forgotten how to shed tears. The April sun in the southern United States wasn't fierce, but it was persistent, like the sun itself was tired of shining down on this place. Nathaniel Grayson sat in the dusty black car, stopped in front of a row of low-rent apartments. The rough grey walls, windows taped shut, the rusty mottled tin roof, all created a picture that was both familiar and forgettable. "We could tear it all down and rebuild," the young architect standing next to him suggested. "There's nothing to keep." Nathaniel didn't answer immediately. He quietly got out of the car, holding a notebook, his eyes sweeping from the dry trees to the moss growing on the base of the walls. He looked around, then gently shook his head. "Number A's, dilapidated as it is, this is still a refuge for many people in difficult circumstances," he said, his voice steady. "We still need to calculate carefully." The young engineer hesitated. Nathaniel didn't need to hear more. For him, this wasn't just a property inspection. It was confronting an old failure, a promise he had broken. 5 years ago, he had sponsored a housing complex for immigrant families, hoping to bring about a new beginning. But only 6 months later, the roof collapsed due to poor quality materials, and a 7-year-old child was seriously injured. The construction company took the blame, the supervisor was fired, but that loss, although not directly his, still made him never fully trust the system again. Since then, each year, he personally selected a few places from hundreds of locations, coming to inspect them without warning. He didn't believe in reports. He only believed in what he saw, and no one could see for him. This apartment complex belonged to a charity he founded, specializing in low-rent housing for single-parent families and the unemployed. On paper, everything was normal. Rent collected regularly, no tenant complaints, technical reports saying satisfactory. But when Nathaniel stepped into the hallway between the 2 rows of apartments, he felt something different. Not exactly a sound, but a feeling. A feeling that someone was watching, but not strong enough to call out. He slowed down as he approached number 7. The wooden door was old and peeling, no nameplate, no sound. The windows were covered with coarse cloth from the inside, making it impossible to see clearly. But what made Nathaniel stop wasn't the old appearance, but the excessive silence, while the other units had radios, fans, cooking sounds, children's footsteps. This house seemed cut off from the rest of the world. "Is this room still occupied?" he asked the engineer. "Yes, a widow and the stepchild of her late husband." Nathaniel nodded, saying nothing more. He took a few more steps, about to turn away, when a very small sound rang out, like metal falling to the floor. He turned back. A crack in the curtains moved slightly, just a little, but enough to make him come closer. He stood right under the window. And then, through the thin, dull grey curtain, he saw a scene that made time seem to freeze. An elderly woman, tall, thin, with disheveled grey-brown hair, was holding a rattan cane, striking a little girl who was hunched over on the floor. Each blow hit her back, her shoulders, and even the wooden floor. The girl didn't cry, didn't call out, didn't resist. She just covered her head, curling up like a dried leaf being crushed. But what made Nathaniel choke wasn't the woman's actions, but the child's eyes. In a brief moment, when she looked up, her eyes staring straight at him. There was no plea for help, no tears, just a look, tired, hauntingly silent, as if she had seen hundreds of people pass by, but no one really saw her. Nathaniel stepped back. He didn't know how. He turned and hurried away, leaving the engineer behind, asking something indistinct. Back in the car, he sat silently. His hand rested on the steering wheel, shaking slightly. Throughout the drive home, he didn't say anything. Red lights and green lights, car horns, music from the radio. Everything slipped away as if he was sitting underwater. That evening, he didn't go home, but stopped by the office. The lights were off. Only the light from the laptop screen reflected on his wrinkled face. He opened the housing complex file. The first page was a satellite image. House number 7, a small square located between other squares, was nothing special. But he couldn't take his eyes off it. He flipped the page. Scroll down to the list of residents. Isabella Whitman, renting from 3 years ago. No one living with her, no children, no further notes. He closed the laptop. All night, Nathaniel didn't sleep. The girl's icy gaze through the dusty glass kept appearing in his head, an expression that didn't beg, didn't plead, but therefore struck straight into his conscience. No one looks at a child like that, if they have nothing to hide, and no one endures like that, if they don't know that no one will come to save them. The next morning, when the assistant walked in, Nathaniel said, his voice hoarse and low, "Start rechecking all guardianship records at the apartment complex. All of them. From the beginning." And from that day, an invisible string between Nathaniel and house number 7 was tied again, not because of duty and not because of law, but because for the first time in many years, he realized, there are looks powerful enough to stir an entire life. Nathaniel returned to the apartment complex 3 days later. No specific plan, no papers in hand, and no one with him. He stopped the car in the same spot, turned off the engine, lowered the car window a bit to hear the sounds of the street, the wind blowing through the iron fence, the barking of dogs echoing from the empty lot, the sound of bicycle wheels rolling on gravel, and the absolute silence from house number 7, like last time. This time, he didn't go right up to the window, just stopped across the street. In his hand, he carried a small paper bag. Inside was a crispy sesame seed bread roll, 2 old comic books bought from a liquidation bookstore, and an unsigned letter. He put the paper bag down on the steps, knocked lightly on the door, and turned away, without waiting. He wanted to let the person behind that door choose. Marina opened the door when the sun had gone down past the roof across the street. She didn't come out, just peeked through the door, looked around, and then bent down to pick up the paper bag as if afraid someone was watching. Her eyes scanned each item inside. The bread roll, the worn comic book covers, the paper wrapping with a faint smell of strangers, but no name, no message. She put everything on the table, gently as if touching a luxury item. The fragrant smell of bread made her stomach growl. But Marina didn't dare eat it right away. She wrapped it in an old cloth, stuffing it under the bed, where she still hid the things she wasn't ready to lose. She flipped through the pages of the comic book, simple drawings, animals wearing clothes, talking to each other in a gentle language. A fox, holding the hand of a rabbit, walking through the forest with a small house where everyone greets each other every morning with a smile. Marina read that, and then stopped. Night fell. Isabella came home late that day after visiting a friend. She walked in with a bag of ready-made food, put it heavily on the table, her eyes glancing around as usual. Then she stopped. The book. She picked it up, flipped through a few pages, then turned to look at Marina. "Where did this come from?" Marina didn't answer, standing still. "I'm asking you, are you mute?" Still silent. The only answer could bring one thing: a beating. So she chose silence, like so many times before. Isabella snatched the book, went straight to the backyard, where the wood stove was still warm with embers. She threw the book into the fire, like throwing a piece of trash, without hesitation. Marina stood behind the door, looking through the crack. The fire flickered, swallowing the image of the rabbit and the fox. The paper burned, twisting, turning black, then falling like dead butterflies. She bit her lip, not because she regretted a book, but because she had just lost something she hadn't had time to name. That night, when Isabella was asleep, Marina quietly went to the yard. She used a small piece of firewood to push around the ashes, looking for pages that hadn't burned. 2 pieces of paper were left, warped, scorched, but still readable. One of the 2 pieces had only one line: "You deserve to be loved." Marina sat down, her hands trembling as she smoothed out the piece of paper. The dim moonlight shone down, enough to see the printed words thin as hair. She repeated that sentence in her head, like a forgotten spell. Then she folded it up, stuffing it into the cloth doll she had sewn the night before. On the other side of the street, in a car, Nathaniel witnessed everything. He saw the girl come out, rummaging through the ashes with her bare hands, picking up the scraps that no one wanted to keep. He didn't hear her voice, but he felt a quiet reverence in every movement. No one picks up ashes if it wasn't once fire. No one keeps a burnt piece of paper if the words on it have no meaning to them. Nathaniel leaned his head against the driver's seat. His hand rested on his chest, where his heart tightened as if a string was squeezing it. For the first time in many years, he felt afraid. Not afraid of Isabella, not afraid of the system, but afraid that if he didn't do anything, that look would go out, and that child would no longer believe in anyone. The next morning, he returned to the office. No meetings, no reading reports, Then he called Rafael Mendoza, an old lawyer who had once helped him save an immigrant boy from an illegal detention camp. "We need to meet," he said. "This time it's not a lawsuit, but a child." And in the small room across the street, Marina woke up with a strange feeling. Not relieved, not safe, but something like warmth still lingered on the cold stone. She took the doll, opened the seam, checked the piece of paper. Still there. The words were still there. "You deserve to be loved." No one knew that on that morning, Marina kept her left hand on her chest longer than usual, as if she was checking if her heart still existed. Nathaniel wasn't a policeman, and he wasn't an investigator. He didn't have the skill to find clues, and he didn't know how to ask indirectly to extract information. But he had intuition, something he had learned after many years of running businesses where pretense was packaged as a high-end product. And he had one more thing: the time to observe, and the silence for people to voluntarily say things no one asked. After the day he personally witnessed Isabella beating Marina, he started returning to the apartment complex more often. He didn't try to approach the little girl, and he didn't directly confront the woman. He walked around the block, sat at the corner cafe, bought an old newspaper at the newsstand, just to have a reason to stand nearby. He listened to the greengrocer talk about the difficult owner of the tailor shop across the street. Listened to an old woman say that she once saw the little girl from house number 7 being pushed down, but not daring to cry. And listened to the delivery man say that every time he came to deliver, he only saw the little girl's hand come out to receive the package, never saw her face. From those fragmented pieces, the name Lucia Ortega was repeated, not because she talked a lot, but because she was the last person to work for Isabella and then suddenly quit. That's when Nathaniel went to the small tailor shop where Lucia worked, not as a millionaire, but just as a man who had seen a child being beaten in broad daylight and couldn't ignore it. Lucia Ortega worked in a small tailor shop about 6 blocks away from the apartment complex where Marina lived. She wasn't special, short, her hands rough from stiff fabric and metal, but when Nathaniel mentioned Isabella Whitman, she suddenly fell silent. Then she stood up, locked the shop door from the inside, and pulled out a small, faded, fabric-covered notebook from the drawer. "No one believed me when I spoke," she began, her voice strangely calm. "So I wrote it down." In the notebook were lines of steady handwriting, date, time, names of the workers, hours worked, and special notes. Nathaniel turned to the page that read Marina B. It appeared 7 times. Next to each line were small, stinging notes. Swollen fingers, can't hold scissors. New tear on her back, can't sit for long. She doesn't speak, eyes staring at the wall all day. Last time, blood on her shirt, I gave her a cloth. She hid it. Lucia said, lightly as if talking about the weather. At first, I thought Marina was a relative. Then, I knew she was the stepchild of her husband. But when I asked, Isabella said, "The girl is mute." She looked up at Nathaniel. "But I've never heard anyone mute who knows how to cry so silently." Nathaniel left the shop with the copied notebook. His hand gripped the steering wheel tightly, but his mind drifted somewhere else. That sentence, crying silently, was like a lock twisting into his chest. He thought of Marina's eyes that weren't wet, weren't red, but always hid something broken. The next person he sought was Inez Herrera, an elementary school teacher who used to teach the 1st grade, the year Marina should have been in school. She lived in a cramped apartment on the 2nd floor of an old apartment building. When she saw Nathaniel, she was slightly surprised, but didn't refuse to meet, perhaps because she had been waiting for someone to come for many years. That little girl, she only came to class for 2 weeks, Inez said, her fingers caressing a small handkerchief on her lap. Didn't talk, didn't play with anyone, but drew constantly. But the things she drew, houses without doors, people without mouths. Nathaniel was silent. I reported it to the social work department. Inez continued. Sent 3 letters. All 3 were returned, saying that the school has no right to interfere in legitimate families. After that, I was reminded for interfering too much. Marina disappeared from the class. I never saw her again. A week later, Rafael Mendoza, a human rights lawyer and old friend of Nathaniel, appeared with a file in hand. You guessed right, Rafael said, opening a faded printout. Isabella Whitman never had official guardianship. The ex-husband, Marina's father, died in a traffic accident, leaving behind assets of nearly $2 million. But the will didn't specify who would receive it on behalf of the child. So why didn't anyone check? Nathaniel asked. Because no one wanted to check, Rafael laughed softly, bitterly. The file was submitted through the property broker. The guardianship certificate was an uncertified copy. No one bothered to verify. In the eyes of the law, Marina is a child with a caregiver. That was enough for no one to touch it. Finally, Nathaniel sought out Father Thomas, the oldest priest in the parish. The old priest was silent when he heard Marina's name. That little girl came to confession once, he said, his voice like mixed with wind. Not to confess, but to ask. Ask what? He looked at Nathaniel, his eyes seeming to see through the soul of the person opposite. If I tell all the bad things, will I be punished? If I say it, will people believe it? If I hate my mother, am I a bad child? The last question, Father Thomas lowered his voice, almost whispering, is, if I disappear, will anyone remember? All of them, Lucia, Inez, Raphael, and Father Thomas, had each tried to do something. But each person, each time, had failed. Because they stood alone. Because what was protecting Isabella's wrongdoing was too big of a system and too little of a heart. Because there were walls that only knew how to keep secrets, but no one was loud enough to break them. Until now. Until they started connecting the fragmented pieces. Piecing together from the notebook, the burnt piece of paper, the look in the classroom, and even the whisper in the confessional. That evening, in the small office where the soft light shone on the old file pages, 4 people sat around a wooden table. No lawyers, no police. Just the people who had once been helpless. Raphael put the file down. We don't have much time. If she feels she's being watched, she may very well run away. Nathaniel nodded. Lucia held in her hand the photo of the notebook. Inez was silent, her hand gripping the edge of her shirt. Father Thomas closed his eyes, as if praying. No one said it, but they all knew. This was no longer a legal matter. This was a promise. A final promise for a child that no one had chosen to stand on her side. For the first time, after years of trying alone, they were no longer alone, and hope, for the first time, had a place to begin to sprout. House number 7 has been especially quiet these past few days, not because things are more peaceful, but because that silence seems to be intentionally created by Isabella. She doesn't yell as much as before, doesn't smash things, doesn't raise her cane, but observes Marina more closely. Like a cat watching a mouse, not needing to pounce, just sitting there, is enough to make the other party not dare to breathe heavily. No dinner, she said, when Marina finished sewing the last dress with only 1 stitch of thread left. You're punished for being late. Marina hasn't eaten properly for 3 days, but she's used to it. A hungry stomach can cramp up. Then it will fade away. But her eyes, haven't been seeing clearly lately. Everything seems blurred, sticking together in one streak. Even the light from the dim yellow light bulb hanging from the ceiling becomes blurred. "If you sleep, you won't wake up early," Isabella continued, her voice even like a saying repeated for many years. "As long as you're breathing, you have to work. That's your fate, you hear?" That night, Marina had to sew until 3 in the morning. Each time her head fell to the table, she was woken up by a loud knock on the wooden door. No one in the apartment complex heard, or if they did, they didn't want to hear. When the last stitch was finished, Marina quietly stood up, walking towards the corner of the room. She didn't sleep, just sat hugging her knees, resting her chin on her hands as if trying to keep herself from dissolving. The cloth doll was still there, the only thing not taken away. Marina hugged it, her hand stroking the worn thread through the hair made of blue thread. Dust covered a thin layer on the doll's hair. Marina didn't wipe it off. She felt it looked more like her that way. The next morning, when Marina opened the door to pick up the trash, she saw a white daisy lying on the windowsill, small, pure, and fragilely strange. Nothing else. No bread, no paper, just a flower. She looked around. No one outside, no car sounds, no people. Claudia. She was sure it was her friend. Marina bent down, carefully picked up the flower, hiding it in her pocket. She didn't dare look at it for long, not because she was afraid of being caught, but because she didn't want to hope. Hope makes people weak. But Isabella saw. In the afternoon, when she carelessly left her pocket hanging open on the hook, Isabella found it. "Where did this come from?" she asked, the white daisy lying in her hand, as if it was a dirty object. Marina stood still, not answering. She looked at her for a while, then lowered her hand. Under her heel, she crushed the flower until no petals were intact. Worthless thing. No anger, no shouting, just a calm stomp. But Marina felt like someone was stepping on her own heart. That evening she couldn't fall asleep. The hunger now was no longer cramping, but became something heavy, lying in her chest. Marina sat in the dark, holding the doll, whispering very softly to it, as if afraid of hearing herself. "In the end, no one's coming to save us, are they?" The doll didn't answer, but she didn't expect an answer. She just needed someone to hear her, even if it was fabric and thread. On the 3rd consecutive sleepless night, Marina began to hear a buzzing in her ears. She didn't know if it was a real sound or an imagination. Everything seemed to slow down. Her hand held the needle, but couldn't pierce the fabric. Her fingers bled, but she didn't feel anything. Then suddenly, she screamed. Not because of pain, not because of fear, but because the pressures in her heart had been suppressed for too long. The scream wasn't loud, but it echoed enough to make her dizzy. Marina herself froze, as if not believing it came from her. Isabella woke up from the room outside. "Are you crazy?" she snapped. "Yelling at this hour?" Marina looked at her, her eyes not resentful, not remorseful, just eyes that seemed to be awakened after a long, long sleep. Isabella suddenly fell silent. For the first time, she didn't say anything more. She came closer, but didn't raise her hand. She looked at Marina, and suddenly saw that something had changed. No longer a look of resignation, and not of opposition, but a threatening emptiness, as if this child was about to no longer be a child, about to no longer be the obedient little girl she could control. When Isabella left, Marina collapsed to the floor. No more tears, and no more anger, just a void that had just opened in her heart. A void wide enough for something to creep in. Not hope, but the need to live, to step out of this room, out of the doors that are always locked, out of the shadow of the woman who sees her as property. Marina didn't know what that was called, She only knew that she had just heard her own voice, for the first time in many months. Outside, the wind blew through the crack in the door, carrying with it a crushed white petal. It rolled into a corner of the wall, lay there, distorted, but not yet dissolved. The evening breeze blew through the hallway of the apartment building, making the warped iron door creak like a groan. Nathaniel stood in front of house number 7, holding a stack of documents and a legitimate reason to knock on the door. "We are conducting routine safety checks," he said, looking directly at Isabella, who had just opened the door less than a third of her face. "There's nothing to check," she replied coldly. "My house is fine. Nothing is broken. We need to confirm to ensure proper procedure. All apartments must be checked in this round." Isabella laughed dryly. "You think I don't know what you're doing?" Nathaniel was silent, not denying, not retreating. In the brief silence between the two, Marina stood behind the thin curtain, quietly looking out. No one knew she was there, but she saw everything clearly. The man's eyes, calm but determined, and the stepmother's hand clenching the doorknob as if about to break it. "Go away," Isabella said, her voice dry. "If you don't have a warrant, I won't open the door." Then she slammed it shut. The sound of the bolt locking was heavy, like an ending. Outside, Nathaniel slowly walked out into the hallway, stopping under the shade of a tree. In his pocket was a copy of the file Raphael had just completed that morning, with full legal basis for a lawsuit, except for one thing, the confirmation of Marina herself. "We have everything," Raphael said as he put the file on the table, except for the little girl's voice. "The girl doesn't speak," Nathaniel replied, his eyes staring into the distance, "or has never been allowed to speak." In the small room, Marina held her cloth doll, quietly opening the seam in the back, where she had once hidden the first piece of paper, the words that had survived from the comic book, "You deserve to be loved." Next to that piece of paper, today she stuffed another piece, smaller, written in her own trembling handwriting. "If anyone finds this, I don't want to go anywhere. I don't want to go with her. I want to stay." After writing, her hands trembled, not because she was afraid of being discovered, but because for the first time she wrote something so clear, not vague, not imagined, but the truth. And the truth is sometimes more frightening than silence. That same afternoon, Claudia, the neighbor girl, left a small bag of cakes, as always, but this time, inside, there was also a piece of paper folded in quarters. Marina picked it up without letting anyone see. She opened the paper in the corner of the room, where the light from the window fell enough to read. Child's writing, but neat. "I know you're not invisible. I see you every day. If you can't speak, then I'll speak for you." No signature, but she knew only Claudia would write that. Marina put the piece of paper on her palm. She didn't cry, but her chest throbbed with each light beat. Not like pain, but like when someone first touches a scab, a vague feeling between injury and revival. She turned the piece of paper over, wrote a "thank you" with a blunt pencil, then hid it under the loose brick behind the windowsill, where she knew Claudia often peeked through. That night, Marina didn't sleep. She hugged the doll sitting in the corner of the bed, her eyes wide open in the dark. Not waiting for anyone, not hoping anyone would come. But in her heart, there was a small movement, like when she saw a seed sprout in a clear glass of water, even though no one believed it could live. For the first time in a long time, she imagined herself being saved, not like a dream, not flying away, not someone hugging her and running away from this place, but as simple as being taken by the hand and led across the threshold, and then someone saying, "Let's go home." She had never heard anyone say that, but she thought, if someone said it, that would be the person she would believe. She sat for a long time, her fingers tracing the thread of the doll's shirt, imagining another hand. Not the hand that gripped her collar and dragged her away, but the hand that was warm enough to hold when she let go. If I leave this place, who will call my name first? Marina thought. She had never been called by name with affection. She wanted that. Not big, not bustling, just someone remember her name, not call her the girl, not call her it, but call her Marina. Isabella paced around the living room, unable to sleep. She felt something was wrong, a feeling of being watched, surrounded. But no one knocked on the door again. No letters, no police. She looked at Marina. The girl was sitting quietly by the bed, her eyes not closed, and suddenly saw her differently. Not oppositional, not defiant, but disturbingly still. She didn't know that in that darkness, Marina was no longer afraid. She had tasted a morsel of something called someone on the other side. And a child who knows that she has someone on the other side of the door will not be silent forever. Light footsteps sounded in the hallway outside. Someone passed by, not stopping. But for Marina, those footsteps were a signal. Not the stepmother's footsteps, not the sound of threats, but the sound of a person, real, existing outside her world. And those footsteps, as thin as the sound of paper rustling in the middle of the night, had sown a very small seed. It wasn't enough to bloom into belief, but enough to let her know. She wasn't being completely swallowed up by this house. There was a way out, even if she couldn't see it, even if it was just a faint crack of light at the base of the wall. Isabella didn't say a word throughout the afternoon. She went in and out, cleaning the closet, flipping the bed, collecting the last valuable items left. A tarnished silver bracelet, an old perfume bottle, a few old photos of her late husband, yellowed. She didn't shed tears. She just wrapped them up, carefully, like someone who had survived dozens of escapes. Marina wasn't asked anything. She didn't dare. But the atmosphere in the house that day was unlike any other day before. No more cursing, no more sounds of the cane hitting the table. Just a prolonged silence, like the wind before a storm. In the evening, Isabella brought back 2 new sets of clothes, cheap, but without any signs of wear. She gave one set to Marina, ordering, "Change into it." Marina took the unfamiliar clothes. The khaki dress was shorter than any dress she had ever worn. The shirt had a zipper and a hood. She didn't understand, but still followed the order. After that, she dragged her into the bathroom, sat her down on a chair, and pulled out the dull iron scissors from the cabinet. She cut her hair, without warning. Isabella cut her hair with impatient strokes of the scissors. Hair fell in clumps to the floor. A lock caught on Marina's shoulder. She didn't brush it off. Looking at herself in the mirror, she saw a strange face, with a bare forehead and eyes no longer hidden. "No one will recognize you," Isabella muttered behind her. Marina still didn't react, but a question popped up in her head. If no one recognizes me anymore, then who will look for me? Late at night, Marina was woken up by a violent tug. "Take your things," Isabella ordered. "We're leaving." She didn't ask where. Isabella didn't say. She only saw her bring a big bag with some papers and a strange passport, a different name, a photo cut from somewhere and pasted on. Marina didn't sleep all night. While Isabella was busy packing, she sat in the dark, holding a small piece of paper, writing quickly. "If anyone asks, I'm not going with her. I don't agree." She folded the piece of paper very small, sewing it hidden into the hem of her new shirt with blue thread, the very thread she had used to make hair for the doll. A taxi carried them through the empty streets towards the Federal train station. Marina sat in the back seat, not speaking, Outside, streetlights swept across her face in short bursts. Light, then dark. Light, then dark, like a slow-motion film. At a red light intersection, a school bus passed by. On the bus, children waved, shouting to each other through the glass. Marina looked, not blinking. She wasn't jealous, not sad. She just quietly touched the hem of her shirt, as if to check. The piece of paper was still there, and her decision had not been taken away. Isabella gasped, checking her watch. "Go faster," she urged the driver. "The last trip is at 10:15. When they arrived at the train station, she pulled Marina out of the car, walking very fast. Not much luggage, just a backpack and an old paper bag. Marina didn't resist, but she was no longer the child being dragged aimlessly. She was counting each step, not to run away, but to wait for the right moment. In her head, the image of Nathaniel appeared like a stake tied to the edge of a cliff. She didn't know his name, had no information about him, but she knew he was the first person to stop when he saw her being beaten. And someone like that surely wouldn't turn away when she needed him. She had seen him through the crack in the curtains, only fleetingly, but that look was enough for her to believe. He wasn't like the others, not asking if she was okay, not hastily promising anything. He just stood there, not turning away. And for Marina, standing still, in a world where everyone leaves, was an act with a weight equal to love. At the train station, the white lights were as bright as day. Announcements were constant. People dragged suitcases hurriedly. Isabella squeezed Marina's hand tighter. Every time she slowed down, Isabella pulled her hard. Marina didn't react. She just turned her head, looking around. Marina stood next to Isabella, near the ticket check area. Her hand was being held tightly, the knuckles turning purple under the pressure. Under the cold fluorescent light, she looked up. The electronic board flashed red letters, "Departure." There was no one for her to wave goodbye to, no one waiting for her at the destination. And if she got on this bus, maybe no one would ever see her again. Isabella pulled hard. "Go," she said quietly, through gritted teeth. Marina followed, but each step was a distance closer to disappearing completely. The line was silently queuing in front of security. Marina tried not to shake, but her hands were no longer her own. A strange feeling, as if her body was being controlled by someone else, a puppet being led through each knot. Her eyes scanned around, not searching for a familiar face, just hoping. Some eyes will know who she is. In her pocket, the hem of the paper she was hiding remained still, rubbing lightly against her hand each time she moved. The paper has never been read, but she knows the content of each letter. They are the only resistance she has before everything belongs to others. Isabella jerked her hand one more time as the loudspeaker rang. "Passengers on Intercity Bus 2215 to Mexico City, please go to the check-in area." The sound was like a starting gun. Marina was pushed towards the security gate. A uniformed person checked the papers. Isabella handed over a passport. Fake, she knew. The name on it wasn't hers. The picture wasn't her. But people don't know. People won't ask. A second before passing through the scanner, Marina stopped. She couldn't hear anything anymore. All the sounds were strangled, as if in water. The crowd blurred. Her eyes flickered, but only one thing remained clear: the hem of the shirt, where the paper was hidden. She reached out to grasp it. "Go!" Isabella snapped louder. She leaned down and whispered, "If you don't go, you're dead to me." But Marina wasn't afraid anymore. A hot flash spread up her chest, ran through her throat, touched the vocal cords that had been silenced for too long. She didn't know where she got the breath from, just knew that if she didn't speak now, she would never hear her voice again. And then, "I don't want to go with her." The scream rang out, Not loud, not sharp, but clear, decisive, like a knife cutting in half the invisible string that had bound her for so many years. A moment of silence enveloped. Then, everything stirred. The people in front turned around. The security guard was stunned. An old woman pulling a suitcase stopped in midair. Agape at the short-haired girl, standing tremblingly next to a stern-faced woman. Marina stood straight, her hand still grasping the hem of her shirt. Not running away. Not retracting her words. A train station employee approached, his voice low but resolute. "What's going on here?" Isabella was about to answer when Nathaniel stepped out of the crowd. No introduction was needed, no names. Just him standing there, tall, calm, his eyes not leaving Marina. And for the first time, the girl stepped towards him. Not waiting for anyone to call, not asking if she was allowed, just stepping forward, step by step, as if taking herself out of hell. Raphael followed closely behind, handing the file to the train station employee. A few minutes later, 2 more people from the internal security office showed up. Isabella was asked to produce papers. She flustered, still yelling that Marina is my child, that she's just panicked, that she's sick. But no one believed her anymore, because the child had spoken, and that voice was real. Marina stood next to Nathaniel. He didn't touch her, didn't say well done, didn't comfort her. He just stood, letting her know she was no longer alone. She looked up at him. Nathaniel nodded slightly. There was no need to say anything. That nod was the final confirmation that, "I see you now. From now on, no one will make you disappear again." A female employee took Marina to a spare chair, pouring water. She didn't drink. She just sat there, looking at her hands, her fingers shaking, but no longer purple. Shaking with release, with crossing the threshold, because she had just broken the cage that no one saw, but she had been in for so many years. When the police arrived, Isabella was no longer yelling. She just sat down on the bench, her face pale. She didn't look up at Marina once more. She knew. The only thing that had kept her safe before was the silence of that girl. And now, when that voice rang out, she had nothing left. On the way out of the train station, Marina turned back. The people who had been standing there were still looking at her, not pitying, not curious, but as if they had just seen something very real, very old, very much in need of protection. She took Nathaniel's hand, not being dragged, but voluntarily following. For the first time, she left a place, without feeling like she was being left behind. Marina's new home was at the end of a tree-lined street, far from the town center. The house wasn't big, but had a small garden in the back, windows facing the morning light, and especially no locks in the bedroom. Nathaniel intentionally left it that way. The day Marina was brought here, he didn't ask her if she was afraid, didn't suggest what she should call him. He just said, softly, as the wind brushed through her newly regrown hair, "Here, you don't need to do anything to be at peace." The first week, Marina didn't say much. She slept close to the edge of the bed, not daring to lie in the middle. Even though the mattress was very soft, the pillow smelled of soap. She still lay on her side like in the old house, as if ready to roll off the bed if someone walked in. Some nights, Marina woke up in the middle of the night. The window wasn't closed tight. The wind blew, making the curtains flutter. She startled, shrinking, listening to every sound. A small click in the kitchen, just the water bottle expanding from the cold. But she couldn't fall back to sleep. She pulled the blanket over her head, leaving only a small gap to breathe, like she used to do whenever she was afraid of Isabella opening the door unexpectedly. Each morning, Nathaniel left a glass of warm milk and a small piece of bread on the dining table, not calling, not waiting, If she didn't touch it, he didn't ask why. The kitchen light was always on all night. She didn't know he did it on purpose, but on the third night, Marina first tiptoed down to the kitchen, sitting and stealing a leftover cookie. Still according to old habits, eating slowly, cautiously, her hands hugging her body. The next morning, on the dining table, was a small piece of paper, neatly written. If you're hungry, eat any time. No one keeps records here. That lunchtime, Marina smiled for the first time, even if it was just a pursed lip, when she saw the piece of bread with a small toothpick stuck in it like a candle. Nathaniel pretended not to see, but in his heart, a silent joy arose. That pursed lip, for him, was more radiant than any laughter. There was a wardrobe in Marina's room. The wardrobe was white, with round porcelain knobs, stickers of small stars. But for many days, she didn't touch it, just looked from afar. Every time she passed by, she felt her heart beat fast, as if just opening it, something would burst out, forcing her to pay the price for the good things she had. Nathaniel never touched the wardrobe. He left it there, as if understanding that the wardrobe door would only be opened when she was ready. Not sooner, not later. One sunny morning, Marina found a box of crayons in the drawer. The metal box was worn at the corners, the lid a bit sticky, but inside there were enough colors. She sat by the window, starting to draw. The first picture was streaks of color. The second picture had a sky. By the third picture, she drew the entrance to the train station, but no trains. Just a man standing by the lightboard, his hands in his pockets, looking into the distance. At first, she hid the paintings under the mattress, afraid that someone would see them and punish her. But then, when she finished drawing the man standing waiting at the train station, she put the picture on the table, not asking permission, not hiding, just putting it there, like a first word she dared to say in color. The painting wasn't signed, but when Nathaniel saw it being put on the wall, he just nodded, not asking, not commenting. He understood, because sometimes silence is the first language of trust. Marina started writing letters. Not long, just a few lines, written to Claudia. She didn't send them, because she wasn't sure if her friend was still at the old house. But each time she finished writing, she felt a little lighter. I think the light doesn't hate me. Before, I thought I was being punished, so I was in the dark. But now I know. The light is still there. I just haven't dared to come out yet. One afternoon, Marina went for a walk with Nathaniel to the small stream behind the house. The water flowed slowly past the rocks. The grass on the bank swayed gently in the wind. She carried a small wooden box, not telling him what was inside. When they reached the log bridge across the stream, Marina stopped. Her hand trembled as she opened the lid. Inside was the old cloth doll, the one she used to hug every night in the room without a window. She touched it one last time, stroking the worn threads that had faded, then gently dropped it into the water. The doll floated on the surface for a moment, spinning a few times as if waving goodbye, then floated away, disappearing after the small bend. Nathaniel didn't ask what it was. Marina didn't need to say who it was. But in her eyes, for the first time, there was a space that had been cleaned, no longer the shadow of fear, no longer the breath of the controller. The trial of Isabella Whitman took place on a March morning in a small room of the local courthouse. Outside, the cold wind blew through the old wooden benches. Inside, no one spoke loudly. Even the chairs were pulled lightly, as if everyone knew that silence at this time was more important than outrage. Marina was present, at her own request. No one forced her to come. Nathaniel even wanted to hide her from the trial, so she wouldn't have to witness anything uglier again. But Marina said, in a decisive tone that he had never heard from her, "I want to know how much she will lie." And he understood. This wasn't for revenge. but to close. Isabella entered with her hands cuffed in front of her stomach. She didn't mope, didn't cry, didn't bow her head. She just stood straight, as if attending a meeting. When asked, she answered in a steady voice, as if recording. I raised her from a young age. No one helped. No one thanked me. She didn't need to go to school. She could learn at home too. I was just holding the money for her. I would give it back when she was old enough. We went abroad because the environment was better. I didn't do anything wrong. Not once in her testimony did she call Marina by name. Just it, the girl, that child. Marina sat in the last seat. She didn't cry, didn't shrink, didn't cover her face like in the old days. She just looked straight at the woman standing in front of the dock. Her eyes had no resentment and not a look of victory. It was silent, but decisive, as the last door was closed, never to be opened again. Beside her, Nathaniel sat still, but his hand rested on Marina's thigh, warm and steady. When the court allowed the victim to submit a personal letter instead of direct testimony, Marina stepped up. She didn't speak, just handed over the small envelope, in which was the piece of paper she had hidden in her shirt. If anyone asks, I'm not going with her. I don't agree. The judge read it aloud. The voice was not high, not dramatic, but in the courtroom, everyone seemed to stop breathing. It was no longer ink on paper, but a living testament to the fact that a child had screamed in silence. In the final arguments, Lawyer Raphael gently turned his head, looking at Marina. Then he said, sometimes, the most terrible thing is not the action, but the fact that a person can do all those things without feeling it's wrong. The sentence was pronounced, 8 years in prison, no parole, along with a commitment to invalidate all financial rights related to Marina's inheritance. Isabella didn't yell, didn't protest. She just smirked, like smiling or like sneering. Marina watched her being escorted out of the room. For a very short moment, their eyes met. Marina didn't bow her head. When it was all over, Marina stepped out into the courthouse yard, where the sun had begun to rise. Nathaniel quietly handed her a bottle of water. She opened the lid, took a sip. The wind blew through her shoulders, but for the first time, she didn't feel cold. Are you okay? He asked. Marina nodded. Not nodding just to get it over with, but nodding to say that, what needed to be faced. She had looked straight at it. That evening, when she got home, she opened the wardrobe. Nothing happened. No one walked in. No screaming. Just a gentle fragrance of new fabric and a row of neatly folded clothes. Marina tried on one, then stood in front of the mirror. She looked at herself for a long time. Not to check if she was beautiful or not, but to check if this was real. She reached out to touch her face, not to wipe away tears, because she wasn't crying, but to feel this skin, this face, this hair that was growing back. All were still here, and she was still a person, not an object to be hidden. At dinner that day, Marina sat at the table before the kitchen lights were turned on. She picked up vegetables, ate rice, drank water. Not secretly, not awkwardly, not startled when Nathaniel got up to get salt. When he returned to the table, Marina was still sitting there, straight back, hands on the table. A very small moment, but for Nathaniel, it was the biggest answer to everything he had never asked. The yellow bus slowly crossed the red dirt road. On both sides were fields of wheat that had just been harvested. On the bus, chatter was rife, interspersed with intermittent laughter. The children were excited for their first picnic after the spring break. Marina sat near the window, holding a worn beige backpack, her eyes looking outside. Her short hair had grown evenly. Her skin was tanned. Her face was thin, but without the panic as before. On her wrist was a string tied from embroidery thread, light purple. Claudia wove for her this morning. "Good luck for your first day away." Claudia said that, then secretly slipped into her hand a drawing. 2 houses, one big, one small, connected by a winding road. Below, her friend wrote in soft pencil, "We all have a home." Marina didn't answer. She just smiled, lightly and truly. She folded the drawing, put it in her pocket, touched it one more time before getting on the bus. "We all have a home." That sentence made her confused, because before, she thought home was a place to hide. But now, she found herself wanting to come back, not because she was forced, but because she knew there would be someone waiting. The trip wasn't long. The school chose a picnic area in the suburbs with a lawn, a small playground, and a few ancient trees providing shade. The children divided into groups to play sports, tug of war, tag, ring toss. Marina chose the ring toss game. At first, she threw crooked. The children burst out laughing. She wasn't angry, also didn't retreat. On the third try, the plastic ring fell right on the top of the pole, and a round of applause rang out. Someone shouted, "Hit it!" Marina smiled, a real smile, not wary, not afraid, not looking around to see who was watching her. When the children ran towards the dining table, Claudia took her hand. "You throw better than last time." Marina didn't answer, just bowed her head, but her fingers didn't let go. That handshake, for the first time in a long time, wasn't squeezing, wasn't pulling, but was holding back. In the distance, Millionaire stood by the row of trees, holding a scorebook. She had applied to transfer back to her old school, and today was the first day she returned in the role of observer. When she saw Marina hit the ring, she startled, not because of the throw, but because that smile, shining like the sun breaking on the water, a smile that she thought would never be on that face again. Inez turned away. Tears fell on her wrist, not because of sadness, but because in the end, that child had not been swallowed. At lunchtime, Marina sat next to Claudia under a tree. The lunchbox she brought had peanut butter sandwiches, a few slices of apple, and a paper carton of milk. Nathaniel told her that she could change the dish if she didn't like it. But today, she ate it all. Not because she was hungry, but because she no longer had to hide food for tomorrow. When the picnic ended, the children got on the bus one by one. The moans of "too soon" rang out, but none of the children were angry for long, just a lollipop or a new joke, and they had already forgotten. Marina sat next to the window, like when she came, but this time she didn't look far away. She looked towards the school gate, where the bus would stop in a few minutes. She looked down at her new sneakers, the kind with laces. She still didn't know how to tie them tightly. Nathaniel had to help in the morning. But he said, "It's okay. You just practice." Today, she tied them herself, a little crooked, a little loose, but they were her own. The bus stopped in front of the gate. The teacher went around reminding the children to check their belongings, clothes, socks, then asked each of them, "Who's picking you up?" to avoid confusing people. When she reached Marina, she asked quietly, in a soft voice, no different from how she asked the other children, "Marina, who's picking you up this afternoon?" She thought she would hesitate, thought she would point, thought she would bow her head. But Marina looked up, her eyes bright in the afternoon sun. Her face was not timid and not too tough, just an 8-year-old girl, normal, as she should always have been. And she replied, in a clear, steady voice, "My dad is waiting for me at the gate." No one asked more. No one needed to explain. The man standing on the other side of the fence, his hair salt and pepper, his jacket dark, holding a bottle of water, didn't need papers to prove his role. Because Marina had called, and calling is choosing. Inez stood behind, her hand lightly gripping the back of the seat. She didn't push forward, didn't come closer, just looked, like she used to look at Marina through the classroom window in the old days. Claudia waved when Marina got off. Marina waved back, but her eyes didn't leave that familiar shape. The shape that had been waiting, not urging, not impatient, as if he had always been standing there, just waiting for her to be ready. When Marina stepped out of the gate, Nathaniel held out his hand. Not hugging, not carrying, just holding out his hand, like a father holding out his hand to welcome his child home. And Marina, without hesitation, put her hand in his. Holding his hand, she didn't think about the trip and didn't remember the old house. She just thought, now it's afternoon, and someone has been waiting for me. The waiting was not a reward, but an affirmation that she was worth someone waiting for. Everything had started again, not with a sentence, not with a triumphal trumpet, but with a small call, light, but big enough to end a journey full of darkness. My dad is waiting for me at the gate. The story of Marina, Nathaniel, and the silent people like Lucia, Inez, Raphael, is not a story about a magnificent rescue. It is a reminder that sometimes, to change the life of a child, you don't need a miracle. Just a long enough look, a deep enough question, and a person who refuses to turn away. And if you, the one who has patiently read to this line, have ever felt like you were forgotten, ever wanted to scream but no one heard, or ever thought that your voice wasn't loud enough for anyone to listen, please remember that. As long as there is one person who believes you have value, then you are not invisible. Thank you for staying. I hope you leave with something left in your heart, not pain, but tenderness. Because sometimes the most beautiful thing is not to be seen, but to be seen through, and still be loved.